When Emma told me she was heading to Miami for her best friend Rachel's bachelorette party, I didn't think twice. "Go have fun," I said, watching her toss an array of dresses into her suitcase. "You sure you won't miss me?" she teased, holding up a sleek red dress I hadn't seen in years. I smirked, leaning against the doorframe. "I'll survive. Just promise Miami doesn't steal you away." Emma laughed, zipping her bag with a grin. "Don't worry, I'll be back before you know it." She kissed me on the cheek, lingering just long enough to make me miss her already, then disappeared out the door. I didn't question a thing. Why would I? She was my fiancée, my future. When Emma came back 3 days later, something felt off. She stepped into the house, her suitcase rolling behind her. Her smile was bright, too bright, and her laugh felt forced as she hugged me. "I missed you," she said, her voice light, almost rehearsed. "I missed you too," I replied, pulling her in for a kiss. Her lips met mine, but something about it felt distant. Distant but familiar, like she was trying to erase something, not share it. "You have a good time?" I asked casually, taking her bag. "Oh, you know, girl stuff. Dancing, drinking, the usual," she said, brushing past me toward the kitchen. Her tone was breezy, but her movements were too quick, too deliberate. She avoided my eyes, and I noticed how her phone never left her hand. That night, as we lay in bed, I reached for her, brushing my hand against hers. "You seem quiet. Everything okay?" Emma turned her back to me, pulling the blanket tighter. "Just tired. It was a long weekend." Her words sat heavy between us. Something wasn't right. The woman lying next to me felt like a stranger, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd brought something back from Miami, something I couldn't name yet. It started with a laugh, a light, airy sound coming from the bathroom. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through the channels, when I heard Emma giggle. It wasn't unusual for her to talk to friends, but something about the tone made me pause. It was softer, almost flirtatious. Curious, I walked toward the hallway. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and I could see her reflection in the mirror. Emma had her phone raised, tilting her head just so, her lips slightly parted as she snapped a photo. She glanced down at the screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Emma!" I called out, stepping closer. She flinched, nearly dropping her phone. "David, you scared me," she said, her voice unnaturally high. "Sorry," I replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Who are you texting?" "No one, just Rachel. She wanted pictures from the trip," Emma said quickly, shoving her phone into her pocket. Her explanation didn't sit right with me. The look on her face was too guilty, too defensive, like a kid caught stealing cookies before dinner. "You send Rachel pictures from the bathroom?" I joked, trying to keep the mood light even as unease churned in my stomach. Emma forced a laugh. "I just realized my hair looked a mess. I was fixing it up, that's all." I nodded, but something about the way she clutched her phone made me pause. I walked back to the living room, but the image of her, flushed cheeks, hurried movements, lingered in my mind. It wasn't like her to be so jumpy. An hour later, as she was making tea in the kitchen, I saw her phone lying on the counter. The screen lit up with a message, and curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, my breath catching as I read the notification. It was from a contact named Sammy Barr. The message read, "You looked incredible in red. Hope the picture wasn't just for me." My blood ran cold. "David!" Emma's voice broke my trance, and I quickly put the phone back. She entered the room, her eyes darting to the counter. Her smile faltered for just a moment before she quickly masked it. "Want some tea?" I stared at her, my mind racing. "Sure," I said, my voice tight. "Tea sounds great." I didn't confront her, not yet, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing fast. The seed of doubt became a storm I couldn't ignore. Later that night, while Emma slept beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about that message. Hope the picture wasn't just for me. Her words earlier, about texting Rachel, suddenly felt like a blatant lie. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, heart pounding as I crept to the kitchen where she'd left her phone. Unlocking it was easy, I knew her passcode. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages. Most of them were harmless. Group chats with Rachel and the bridesmaids, quick notes about work, grocery lists. But then I found the thread with Sammy Barr. It wasn't long, but it was damning. Sammy Bar. You were the highlight of my weekend. The red dress was perfection. Emma. You're sweet, but this has to stay in Miami. No exceptions. Sammy Bar. Too late for that. Can't stop thinking about you. Emma. Don't make this harder than it already is. The words blurred in front of me. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The woman I was about to marry, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had done this. My grip tightened on the phone, my knuckles white with the effort to stay quiet. I put the phone down and paced the darkened kitchen. The betrayal hit me in waves. Anger, disbelief, pain. Questions flooded my mind. How could she do this? Was it a one-time mistake? Was it still happening? When I returned to bed, Emma stirred slightly but didn't wake. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the words from her messages looping endlessly in my head. This has to stay in Miami. It wasn't just the betrayal that burned. It was the fact that she had tried to hide it, that she thought she could keep it from me. And now, knowing what I knew, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. By morning, I had decided I needed more proof. Something undeniable. Something she couldn't talk her way out of. The next crack came sooner than I expected. Emma was getting ready for a dinner we'd planned with some friends. She was in the bathroom, the door left slightly ajar, humming softly to herself. I wandered into the bedroom, straightening my tie, when I noticed her phone sitting on the bed. Unlocked. The temptation was unbearable. I picked it up, my stomach tightening as I swiped to her camera roll. At first, it was just photos from the Miami trip. Her and Rachel posing on the beach, cocktails at a rooftop bar. But then I found it. A picture of Emma standing in our bathroom mirror, her red dress clinging to her curves, her lips slightly parted as if she were mid-sentence. She wasn't smiling. It wasn't a casual selfie. My chest tightened. That wasn't for me. She'd never sent me anything like it before. My hands shook as I scrolled further and found another one. A closer shot, the hem of her dress hiked slightly higher. My blood ran cold. "David!" Emma's voice startled me. I whipped around, the phone still in my hand. She was standing in the doorway, her eyes darting between me and the screen. Her face paled, but she quickly recovered, forcing a nervous laugh. "What are you doing?" she asked, crossing her arms over her chest. I held up the phone, the photo still displayed. "I was about to ask you the same thing." Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then narrowed. "I was just messing around. Rachel dared me to take a photo in the dress before dinner one night. It's no big deal." I stared at her, my jaw tightening. "Rachel dared you? And you saved it? Why?" Emma hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the phone. "I forgot to delete it. You're reading too much into this." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You know what I think? I think this wasn't meant for Rachel, or me." Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Her face flushed, not with embarrassment, but guilt. That was when I knew. "Who was it for, Emma?" My voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the air like a blade. "No one," she said quickly. "David, you're being paranoid." I shook my head, my grip tightening on the phone. "Paranoid? Am I? Because this," I gestured to the screen, "isn't something you send to a bridesmaid." "Can we not do this right now?" she snapped, her voice rising. "We're going to be late for dinner." Her attempt to deflect only fueled my anger. "Late for dinner? Emma, do you even hear yourself? Who was the picture for?" She turned away, grabbing her makeup bag off the counter with trembling hands. "I told you, it's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I could feel it in the way she avoided my gaze, in the way her voice wavered when she spoke. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't trust a single word that came out of her mouth. That night at dinner, Emma acted as if nothing had happened. She laughed, she told stories, she sipped her wine. But I couldn't focus. My mind was stuck in the bathroom, replaying her expression, the slight hitch in her voice. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. The breaking point came 2 nights later. It was late, nearly midnight. Emma had gone to bed hours ago, claiming she had a headache, while I stayed up nursing a drink and scrolling mindlessly through the TV channels. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old floorboards. I was just about to call it a night when I heard it. A knock at the door. Frowning, I set my glass down and moved toward the door cautiously. Who the hell was knocking at this hour? Peering through the peephole, my stomach dropped. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket. He had an air of confidence that immediately put me on edge. I opened the door just a crack, keeping my foot against it. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," he said, his voice smooth but carrying a hint of cockiness. "I'm looking for Emma." His words hit me like a gut punch. My grip on the door tightened. "And you are?" He smirked, leaning casually against the doorframe. "She didn't tell you about me, huh?" Figures. The pieces clicked into place so fast it felt like my brain short-circuited. This was him, the bartender, the man from Miami. "Leave," I said, my voice cold and steady, even though my heart was hammering in my chest. He didn't budge. "Look, man, I don't want trouble. I just think Emma and I have some unfinished business." I slammed the door shut, my pulse roaring in my ears. I locked it, my hands trembling with rage. But before I could turn away, his voice came from the other side. "She's the one who reached out, you know. Texted me first, so don't blame me for all this." The audacity of it sent me over the edge. I yanked the door open and stepped out onto the porch, towering over him. "If you don't leave right now, I'll make you," I growled, my fists clenched at my sides. He shrugged, unfazed. "Fine. Tell her I stopped by." "Oh, and He leaned in closer, his smirk widening. "You might want to check her phone again. Bet there's more she hasn't told you." That was it. My fist connected with his jaw before I even realized I'd swung. He stumbled back, clutching his face, but he didn't fight back. Instead, he laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that made my blood boil even more. "Touchy, huh?" he said, wiping the corner of his mouth. "Guess I'll take that as my cue to leave." I stood there, chest heaving, as he walked away, his hands stuffed casually into his jacket pockets. When I turned to go back inside, I saw Emma standing at the top of the stairs, her face pale, her hands gripping the railing tightly. "David," she whispered, her voice trembling. What was that?" I locked the door behind me, the anger surging back. "Care to explain why your friend from Miami thought it was a good idea to show up at our house?" Her eyes widened. "What? No, that's not—" "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't you dare lie to me again." Tears filled her eyes, but I wasn't in the mood for her excuses. I grabbed her phone off the coffee table and held it out to her. "Unlock it, now." She hesitated, her lip trembling. "David, please, Do it!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. With shaking hands, she unlocked the phone. I snatched it from her and scrolled through her messages, my anger building with every passing second. There it was, a fresh thread from earlier that evening. Him, thinking about you, can't get last weekend out of my head. Emma, you need to stop. This was a mistake. A mistake. That's what she'd called it. But her response wasn't angry or firm. It was soft, almost apologetic. She wasn't shutting him down. She was leading him on. I threw the phone onto the couch, the screen cracking on impact. "A mistake?" I spat. "That's what you're calling it now?" Emma broke down, her sobs racking her entire body. "David, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I don't know why he showed up. I haven't talked to him since Miami." I pointed to the phone. "Don't lie to me. I just read your text. You've been talking to him, Emma. You've been keeping this alive." She fell to her knees, clutching her face in her hands. "I don't know what to say. I was scared, okay? I thought if I ignored it, it would just go away. And instead, you let him walk into our lives, into our home?" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. We stared at each other, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. For the first time, I realized that no matter how much I wanted to fix this, some things were too broken to mend. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said quietly, my voice filled with exhaustion. Emma didn't respond. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face as I walked away. I slept on the couch that night, though sleep wasn't the right word for it. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the events of the evening replaying in my mind like a broken record. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, his smug smirk, his casual arrogance. And worse, I saw Emma, her tears, her silence, her guilt. When morning came, The house was eerily quiet. I found Emma in the kitchen, her eyes red and puffy, a cup of coffee trembling in her hands. "David," she began, her voice hoarse, "I know I've ruined everything, but please, just talk to me." I sat down across from her, the weight of exhaustion pressing on my shoulders. "Talk about what, Emma? About how you let him into your life, into our life, about how you've lied to me over and over." "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered, tears spilling over. "I was lost. No," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "You don't get to make excuses. You had a choice, Emma, and you chose him." Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, an instinct to reach out, to comfort her. But then I remembered the texts, the lies, the betrayal, and the anger returned. "What did you think was going to happen?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but no less biting. "That he'd show up here, and we'd all just... What? Pretend it never happened?" She shook her head, unable to meet my eyes. "I didn't think. I wasn't thinking." I leaned back, running a hand through my hair. "That much is obvious." The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, Emma broke it, her voice trembling. "I'll leave if you want me to. I'll give you space. But please, don't give up on us." I looked at her, my heart heavy. "I don't even know what us is anymore, Emma. You've turned everything upside down." She flinched at my words, and for a moment I thought she might say something, but she just nodded, standing slowly and walking out of the room. I heard the bedroom door close softly behind her, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Scene 8, the confrontation. The following day, I couldn't bring myself to stay in the house. I went for a long drive, my mind racing. Anger, betrayal, and sadness churned inside me, each emotion fighting for dominance. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. When I returned home that evening, the house was dark. Emma's car was still in the driveway, but the place felt empty. I stepped inside, the quiet pressing down on me. "Emma," I called, my voice echoing slightly. No response. I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, a suitcase open beside her. She looked up when I entered, her expression a mix of fear and sorrow. "I thought you'd want me to leave," she said softly. I stared at her, my chest tight. Part of me wanted to yell, to demand answers she couldn't give. But another part of me, smaller, quieter, just wanted to understand. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What did I do wrong?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she stood, stepping closer. "You didn't do anything wrong, David. It was me. I was insecure, selfish. I don't even know why I let it happen." "Did you love him?" The question came out before I could stop it. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It wasn't love. It wasn't even real. It was, a distraction." "A distraction from what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "From me? From our life together?" Her silence was deafening, and I felt my chest tighten further. "I was lost," she said finally. "I felt like we were drifting apart, like I wasn't enough for you anymore." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "So you thought sleeping with a stranger would fix that?" She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she reached for me, her hand trembling. "David, please. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just tell me what to do." I stared at her hand, her tear-streaked face, and for the first time, I saw not just the woman who betrayed me, but the woman I'd built a life with. The woman I'd once loved more than anything. "I don't know if we can fix this," I said quietly, "but I know I can't figure it out with you here right now." Her face crumpled and she nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'll go," she whispered, "but please don't give up on us." As I watched her pack the last of her things and walk out the door, a part of me felt relief, but another part, deep buried, felt the sting of loss. The house was silent, hollow without Emma. I tried to bury myself in routine, but everything reminded me of her, the faint imprint of her heels, the way she folded blankets. Anger simmered, fueled by the memories of her betrayal. One night I reread her letter. Her words were raw, pleading for forgiveness, but they left me conflicted. I hated her for what she'd done, but a part of me still loved her. I didn't have answers yet, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could take a breath. I didn't have to forgive her today or ever, but I knew I needed to find clarity for myself.